A young girl, Wei is sketching a pretty flower she noticed in her father's diary, and she asks about it. He explains that the flower Wei she's drawing is called the corpse flower, which emits a foul smell. Wei asks if her father has found a way to fix his face, and he reassures her he can fix her face too. Later, her father works with a concoction, and he injects a liquid into his skin, and he applies it to his face. Moments later, the grafting procedure accelerates uncontrollably, and the skin begins to regenerate. Eventually, it covered his mouth, and despite his efforts, he is unable to stop the growth and falls. In a desperate attempt, Wei cuts his mouth open, but the skin quickly regenerates. Years pass, and Wei receives a scholarship to New Zealand, and she plans to move in with her Aunt Ling. She is her father's sister who resides in New Zealand and initially hesitant due to the responsibility. But she eventually agrees to take wine, and Ling inspects Wei's birthmark and gives Wei a beauty concealer that would hide it. After loading Wei's belongings into the car, and they head to Ling's house, and when they arrive, Ling begins complaining about her irresponsible husband who abandoned her. And her daughter Angela Ling mentions that the house renovation is at a standstill. They lack funds, and she explains that she started a beauty care business hoping to restore the house. On their way inside, Wei meets Cheryl, the next-door neighbor, whom Ling has hired as a gardener. Angela comes with her dog Bicky, and Ling praises Wei's ability to speak both English and Chinese. She encourages Angela to learn from her cousin, and this irritates Angela. After settling in, Wei overhears Angela speaking to her father on the phone, pleading for him to come and take her away. When Bicky barks, Angela quickly closes the door. The next morning, Wei prays in front of her father's makeshift altar, burning incense and asking him to be with her. She prepares to start her first day at university, and at the university, Wei feels lost. A homeless man asks if she needs direction, and she says she is looking for the science department. He points her in the right direction, and Wei introduces herself, and the man reveals his name is John. Inside the lecture hall, Professor Paul is delivering a lecture, and later, he distributes the mock quiz scores. Wei scores full marks, and this draws attention from the other students, and Paul informs the class that he's looking for a lab assistant and invites interested students to sign up later. Wei enters the lab and begins reading her father's diary, but she's interrupted by Paul. He takes the diary from her hands, and Wei explains that it belonged to her father, who is also a scientist. Paul guesses that she wants to continue his research, and Wei confirms it, and it intrigues Paul. He offers her the lab assistant position and expresses interest in helping with her father's skin grafting experiment. At Ling's house, Angela's friends Jasmine and Eve visit to watch movies, and they notice the prayer altar. Angela explains that it belongs to her weird cousin, and the trio sneaks into Wei's room. They find various insect and images pasted on the walls, and Eve opens a drawer. It had surgical tools stained with blood, and they started feeling uneasy and decided to leave the room. When Wei returns home and greets them, and the trio is startled by her sudden appearance. Angela introduces Wei to her friends, and later, when they watch a horror movie, Wei slurps noodles with prawns, which disgust the trio, and they make excuses to leave. The research board sends Paul an email warning that his funding will be revoked if he fails to make a big discovery soon. The next day, after class, Wei admires Eve's beauty from a distance. She even imitates her accent, and she approaches the trio and invites them to a restaurant. She wants them to try her father's favorite dish, which she plans to place on his altar. Eve and Jasmine, moved by her story, express condolences for her father's passing and agree to come. Jasmine is the only one who tries the dish and actually enjoys it, but Wei encourages Angela to eat. Wei made chicken legs knowing they're Angela's favorite thanks to Aunt Ling, but Angela denies liking them. Wei begins eating messily, and visibly disgusted, Angela and Eve excuse themselves and leave Jasmine. She too regretfully says that she has to go, leaving Wei alone, and leaves for home. Wei encounters John and hands him a parcel, and she opens up about her burn-like scar. Her mother said it was the result of a family curse, which indicates they did something bad. Wei confesses that she feels ugly, and John reassures her, saying that she isn't ugly, the world is. Wei promises to find a way to make both of them beautiful, but John says that she already looks beautiful. Their conversation is interrupted by loud honking from Paul, who tells Wei they need to focus on completing her father's experiment and uncover something groundbreaking. He suggests they start working the next day, and at night Wei prays in front of her father's altar. She wants to make him proud, and suddenly, she hears faint noises coming from Angela's room where she finds Angela sharing an intimate moment with her boyfriend Josh when Vicky starts barking. Angela kicks Josh out and yells at Wei to not be in her sight while she is staying here. She also complains about the rotting smell of food offerings, but Wei defends that Antling allows it. Angela snaps, shouting that her mother is never home, and storms off to her room, and the next day, Wei and Paul work on the skin grafting experiment, and Wei explains that one crucial ingredient is missing. Paul, excited at the possibility of success, declares they could achieve fame. The research drags on, and Paul grows frustrated and frequently snaps at Wei. Jasmine visits the lab to join as a lab assistant, and after filling the form, Wei and Jasmine take a train. During their ride, Jasmine acknowledges how hard it must be for Wei and noticing Wei's scars. Jasmine encourages her to remove her scarf, saying the scarf is ugly, not her scars, and Wei is touched. Wei spots a flyer advertising the corpse flower, and first time in years she recalls, and realizes it may be the missing ingredient, and she visits the exhibition where the corpse flower is. She collects jelly-like substance from it, and back in the lab, she experiments with it and discovers that it works. She has successfully created a solution to instantly repair damaged tissues. Paul and Eve are having an affair and are startled to find Wei in the lab, and Paul instructs Eve to leave. Jealous and suspicious, Eve takes a compromising photo of Wei and Paul while Wei eagerly shows Paul the effectiveness on her skin, but Eve interrupts and invites Wei for a girls' night out. Paul kicks her out of the lab, and in her haste, Wei forgets her father's diary, which Paul finds. And later, he takes photos and sends for translation, and Eve sends the compromising photo to Angela. She becomes furious and tells her mother, and meanwhile Eve drives Wei to a remote location. She tells Wei to stay away from professors before abandoning her there to cry. When Wei finally gets home, she finds her father's altar in shambles and confronts Angela. The argument escalates into a violent scuffle, resulting in Angela's death, and this devastates Wei. She drags Angela's body to the bathroom and begins cutting her scars and grafting Angela's skin onto herself using the substance she created, and despite the agony, Wei is overjoyed to see her scars. They disappear and assumes Angela's face. When Ling returns home, Wei quickly cleans herself up. Ling informs Wei that she'll be leaving for a trip, and Wei studies Angela's videos to imitate her. At university, she receives pleasant smiles instead of disgusted stares, and everyone believes she is Angela. Josh greets her with a kiss, surprising Wei, but she plays along and discovers Angela plays sports. Wei deliberately injures her hand to avoid participating, as she doesn't want to risk revealing herself. Wei longs to be part of the popular circle, and she struggles to know what to say or how to act. Josh takes Wei on a date to a hillside, and as they kiss, the skin graft on Wei's face begins to peel off. Josh, panicked and tries to escape, but accidentally falls off the hill, losing his life. Wei searches for her father's diary and calls Paul, but he doesn't answer her. Paul, now aware of the corpse flower properties, has begun his own research. Wei reapplies Angela's skin using her solution, and meanwhile Paul's friend warns him of the research. Paul receives a call from Wei demanding her father's diary, however Paul reveals his true intentions. claiming that the research now belongs to him, not her father or her, and Wei demolishes parts of the lab in a fit of rage and takes essential items with her before leaving, and outside Eve is in her car. Wei asks Eve for a ride home, though hesitant Eve agrees, and after dropping Wei off, Eve notices something. Angela's face looks dry and suggests she use moisturizer, realizing her grafted skin is deteriorating. Wei takes Eve as her next target, and she plans to use Eve's skin and use her face to retrieve her father's diary. One day, Wei invites Eve for a sleepover, and Wei suddenly attacks Eve, and she panics and runs outside and jumps into a pond to escape, and Wei relentlessly tracks Eve down and kills her brutally. Later, a neighbor knocks on Wei's door, complaining about the dog's incessant barking. Wei, now pretending to be Angela, reassures the neighbor that she'll handle it and uses Eve's skin. She begins imitating her mannerisms and style, and when the police visit Angela's home, Wei, disguised as Eve, flirts with the officers, who leave, asking her to contact if she learns anything. At school, Jasmine expresses concern for Angela, suggesting she must be terrified. On edge, Wei snaps at Jasmine and storms off and attends Paul's lecture as Eve, and late visits him home. Paul took her, thinking that she was Eve, and at night Wei attempts to dispose of Eve's body. But the nosy neighbor keeps interfering and making the task difficult, and Wei begins receiving messages from her victims' phones, and to divert attention, she sends the compromising photo Eve took to the university. The photo results in Paul being swiftly sacked from his position. Desperate to retrieve the diary, Wei sneaks into Paul's house but fails to find it, and Paul arrives home and laments being fired. Paul continues experimenting with the corpse flower substance, discovering it works, and he calls Eve. Wei, spying on him, notices Paul hiding the vial in a cabin. Seizing her chance, she takes it. She makes an excuse to leave, and Paul later discovers the vial missing and deduces Wei's involvement. The diary is safe and remains with him, and with Eve's skin now unusable, Wei removes it. Jasmine visits her and finds her bloodied and wearing Eve's dress, and questions Wei, who confesses she wanted to know how it feels to be admired and famous, and Jasmine, concerned, hugs her. She suggests she come to her house to try on a traditional food. However, when Jasmine opens the fridge, she is shocked. She discovers something horrifying, and Wei attacks her out in a panic and kills her, and then repeatedly apologizes to her corpse. Paul tracks Wei to her home and confronts her and mocks her, claiming he discovered the flower's secret, whereas it took her a lifetime, and calmly Wei reveals the vial is in the fridge, luring Paul closer. She attacks him, and unlike her previous time, Wei feels exhilarated rather than guilty using the substance. She excessively uses the substance on Paul. She causes his body to spiral into uncontrollable tissue regeneration, mirroring what happened to her father. The neighbor, hearing the commotion, barges in, and she is horrified by Wei's appearance and Paul's grotesque state, and she flees to call the police. Realizing the situation is dire, Wei takes the remaining vial and escapes in an underground subway. She encounters John and begs for his help, and when police arrive and question him about a blonde woman, John misdirects them, pointing in the opposite direction, and Wei accidentally drops the vial. The substance spills and infuses her body with John's, creating a grotesque amalgamation of the two. Ling, unaware of Wei's transformation, searches for her niece, and she mistakes someone else for Wei, but then spots the merged John and Wei on the street, who look like a monster and unable to speak.